believed. On board is that American doctor who's been transported from West Africa, who is now an Ebola patient. Ebola patient.
Doctors right here in the United States will battle the Ebola virus.
Ebola virus.
We begin here again tonight with the spread of this Ebola virus.
The death toll is nearing 700.
The deadliest Ebola virus outbreak in history.
There is no treatment or vaccine.
As that American Ebola victim prepares to land on U.S. soil, we want to take you inside the plane.
It's called an aeromedical biological containment system.
And of course, it can travel by air right along with an infected passenger.
It's a nightmare scenario.
Worthy of a sci-fi movie script.
Biological weapon. This might be one form of biological warfare.
A scientist at this lab accidentally pricked her finger with a needle used to inject
the deadly Ebola virus into lab mice.
If we are attacked with biological warfare, health and medical authorities will tell you what to do.
We learned today the first American to die in this Ebola outbreak.
We need a cocktail of drugs and perhaps a nice vaccine
The disease is now officially out of control.
Nice vaccine.
Out of control.
Nice vaccine.
Ebola.
You are the target.
It sounds scary, but I don't know that there's enough panic or enough people who are potential customers for these drugs to warrant a company, a private company anyway, putting the money in that it would take to develop these.
Now that we've gotten the requisite Ebola Fear Porn out of the way, we can actually start the show.
What if I told you that every moment you've been alive, you've been trapped in a box?
A form of control, a virtual prison. You can't see, taste, smell, touch, or hear.
What is the key?
How would you break free? How? First of all, you just got to get control of the fact that life isn't what it used to be. It's not your grandma's life. It's not your daddy's life. It's not the American dream. If that ever existed, it has been absorbed.
You have to be asleep to believe it, isn't that what George Carlin said?
This is Truthstream News, and we're talking right now, of course, about global disorder and the fight for who's going to control geopolitics on the map. And there's conflicts all over the map, just as the Project for a New American Century, crafted by the neocons from the Bush era, declared multiple theater wars. During the Bush years, it was, of course, Iraq and Afghanistan. Now Iraq is back again, while the Cold War menaces and looms over the Ukraine situation. Israel and Gaza is going on. Afghanistan's still happening, along with Pakistan and other conflicts as well. Why is that happening? Well, we're going to get into it right now.
Well, now we've got the Wall Street Journal reporting that Obama is saying this will be a lengthy incursion in Iraq. We're not just going to go over there with a couple of airstrikes and blow a few things up. No, we're going to have to be there for months now. And I think it's kind of interesting that our White House press secretary, Josh Earnest, if that's even his real name, was saying there's no military solution in Iraq. No military solution whatsoever.
Well, John, the thing that's important, again, and it's important for all your viewers to understand this, that there are no military solutions to the very difficult problems that exist in Iraq now.
Good evening. Today I authorized 2 operations in Iraq.
No military solution at all, in fact, to the point that right at the same time you have Obama coming out and saying, but we're going to airstrike. And then you have the New York Times with sycophantic articles like, Obama with reluctance returns to action in Iraq. They don't even call it military action, and they're definitely not calling it war. And then you have Obama saying, I know that many of you are rightly concerned about any American military action in Iraq.
That many of you are rightly concerned about any American military action in Iraq. I ran for this office in part to end our war in Iraq and welcome our troops home. And that's what we've done. As Commander-in-Chief, I will not allow the United States to be dragged into fighting another war in Iraq.
And they just keep saying there aren't going to be any boots on the ground, even though we've doubled the number of troops in Iraq since June. Doubled them. So I guess the boots aren't actually on the ground. I guess they're levitating above the ground.
It's all a joke. People have known for years that we were not really going to leave Iraq, just like we're not leaving Afghanistan. They pushed back the withdrawal dates. The Iraq war was so unpopular that Obama gave the appearance of getting out. They let it sit on the back burner, but now it's heated up again. We'll go figure. They didn't have a real government put in place. It was kind of a placeholder puppet government, and now they're talking about what? Splitting Iraq into 3 states.
Well, I know, maybe if they stopped creating, funding, training, arming, and placing sectarian extremists all around the area to destabilize it, maybe they wouldn't have to go in and bomb their own creations.
It's really disgusting what's happening.
We've been blowing up things in Iraq for over 20 years now, and that's never going to stop until the plan that we've initiated is finished, and we haven't finished it yet. We always create reasons to intervene in these countries because there's a greater plan at work here. We funded and created ISIS and ISIL, only we didn't call them that at the time. We called them the Syria rebels.
Because right now we have a situation where the West is opposing ISIS rebels in northern Iraq, and rightly so, but has been tacitly or implicitly supporting them in Syria. It's madness.
Or were they the Libya rebels that we airlifted from Libya to Syria after we toppled Gaddafi? And we were funding and giving weapons to them through Benghazi in a Fast and Furious scheme, which is probably what got Ambassador Stevens and the other 3 Americans killed. I can't even keep this straight anymore, but I can tell you this is all part of a larger plan that's been on paper since before I was born. It was written by an Israeli journalist named Yanan, and it's been translated into Hebrew, and it looks like this: the Zionist plan for the Middle East. It has to do with destabilizing the entire region so they can rewrite the map. The plan operates on 2 basic principles. Number 1, Israel must become an imperial regional power, and number 2, they must effect the division of the whole area into small states by the dissolution of all existing Arab states. And I do mean all. It's not just Syria, it's not just Iraq. We're talking about Egypt, we're talking about Lebanon, Jordan. They want to get to Iran. This has to do with the whole entire area and putting it under Israel's control. The entire idea is based around fragmenting the area apart, building up sectarian extremists and placing them strategically throughout the region to break it apart into smaller and smaller little areas that they can then put in centralized governments with puppet presidents they control. That way, Israel will control what is now known as the New Middle East, and they will control all of the water, oil, gas, and resources in the entire region. So what's going on right now looks pretty scary, but when you look at it in the larger context of the entire war with Iraq, with what happened with Lebanon in 2006, with the way that the sectarian Muslim Brotherhood was put into power in Egypt, with what happened in Libya, with what's still happening in Syria with over 120,000 Syrians killed, if you look at that whole plan, it's been on paper. This is what they're trying to do. This is what they will continue to do. And Tony Cartalucci of Land Destroyer even reported back in 2012 on an article that was written in 2007 by journalist Seymour Hersh, who revealed a plan by the Bush administration to organize, arm, train, deploy a regional army of terrorists, many with ties to Al-Qaeda, in a bid to destabilize and overthrow both Syria and Iran. That was always the plan. It called for not only setting up terrorist enclaves in nations neighboring Syria, including Lebanon, Jordan, and US-occupied Iraq, but also in building up the Muslim Brotherhood in and around Syria. This was always the plan. And how it works is the United States, UK, and Israel use Saudi Arabia as a proxy to fund all of these sectarian extremist groups, put them into place, and that hides the actions of Tel Aviv and Washington in what's actually going on here and what will continue to go on here. And now there are even reports coming out in French newspapers that the leader of ISIL is a Mossad agent. I don't know if that's true or not, but if I found out that it was, it wouldn't surprise me one bit. If you want to act like this is just the natural progression of things, the way that the mainstream media is trying to tell everyone this is just the natural progression of things, you can try to do that, but just realize that every single thing we're seeing unfold in the Middle East and have been seeing for years now has been written on paper as a plan for decades.
And the underlying factor under all this is bankers, namely the Rothschilds, pivotal in the creation of Israel in the first place, and the major controller of the Anglo-American Empire, who are very much involved in this larger New World Order controlling the globe plan.
Well, I think what frustrates me the most about this is 2 things. One, I'm sick and tired of hearing that ISIS just magically showed up and undid all of the gains of the American military had in Iraq. What gains did we have? Can someone explain to me what those gains were? over 1 million people have died. The whole region's destabilized. All of these terrorist sects have gained large amounts of power. People are being displaced and murdered left and right. We haven't gained anything.
The plan is going according to how they crafted it. It's
exactly
to topple the Ba'athist Party and create this chaos so they could split the state and remap the entire Middle East. That's in the New York Times now.
And put it under the control of Israel. And that's the saddest part. The saddest part is that this country's been at war our entire lifetimes. I mean, I tried to look up 1 year in the whole time I've been alive where America wasn't at overt or covert war somewhere, and I couldn't find it. And sadly, I don't think my children's lifetimes are going to see peace either when you have these psychopaths running the show.
The Middle East has been at war for our entire lives. The Cold War was going on before that, officially ended in 1992. And supposedly peace was the result, but now things are heating back up again from the freezer into the Cold War towards a hot war, obviously with Ukraine in the middle of all that, and it's become very much a NATO faction against Russia and its former satellite countries.
Well, have you seen the new Time magazine for this week? There you go. Cold War II, the West is losing Putin's dangerous game, and his shadow looks suspiciously like Flight MH17, perhaps?
Well, we saw how they tried to use MH17 as a provocation to start war with Russia, to make them look like the aggressors, to make them look like murderers of innocent passengers. That I have yet to see the evidence. It's just not there. At the same time, what's been reported but not focused on is behind all the tensions in Ukraine is once again energy, namely natural gas, shale gas, that they get through fracking. And now Ukraine is threatening to shut off the oil and gas flowing through its country from Russia going to Europe. Just in the last couple days, they've announced their intentions in the wake of Russia's response to sanctions of blocking imports of food from the US, from the EU, and other parts of the Western world. Now they're saying in Ukraine, well, we're going to shut off the natural gas. It's actually been the plan for a while, very devious, because Russia is a major business player in the EU, and by supplying natural gas to them, they heat homes in the winter and they have a major relationship. NATO wants to undermine that and has for many years by exploiting the gas reserves that are conveniently in the hot zone of eastern Ukraine and using Western companies to develop them. So obviously relations between Russia and Ukraine have deteriorated significantly, not only over the Crimea situation, but since Ukraine has refused to pay a $5 billion natural gas bill to Russia. It's in hock and Russia cut off the gas. But Ukraine has been in negotiations to get backflows of that gas from countries that it supplies by way of the routes that flow through its country. And it has the major pipelines from Russia, which allows it to be in a pivot position. And NATO's been exploiting that for years. NATO has had plans to exploit Ukrainian gas, and it's been part of their partnerships over the last decade and a half. Ukraine is not a NATO country, of course, but they've had a relationship with NATO since 1994, a couple years after the Soviet Union collapsed. And in the last few years, there's been increasing pressure to try to make Ukraine a NATO-friendly country. And Russia's obviously not been happy about that because of the clashes between NATO and Russia. Of course, a lot of military backing has gone to Ukraine through the Science for Peace and Security program and their various partnership deals. And one of them has always been to exploit the energy resources in Ukraine, namely the natural gas. Now, Zero Hedge has reported how 90% of the natural gas production and possible production in Ukraine is in that eastern region of Ukraine, the hotly disputed region that Russian separatists have broken off, and that's called the Dnieper Donetsk Basin. That's where all the production's going on, and wouldn't you know it, a company there by the name of Burisma Holdings is doing most of the exploration and production. And who has joined the board of Burisma Holdings but Hunter Biden, the son of the vice president? Not even kidding.
And a son of the U.S. vice president has joined the board of directors of Ukraine's largest private gas producer. Hunter Biden now leads the company's legal unit, getting the position a few weeks after his father's trip to Kiev.
And he's on the board with another American named Devin Archer, who's a partner in the capital firm Rosemont Capital, who are part of the equity behind this exploration company, which is owned in part by an heir to the Heinz ketchup fortune, Christopher Heinz, the stepson of Secretary of State.
Are you
John
kidding
Kerry.
me? Ugh.
Yeah, not even kidding. So
What is Chelsea going to work there next?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. These Western companies want all the money from exploring the gas, but they also want to use it as a wedge against Russia. If they can create the gas and ship it to the EU and other partners and customers, they can further push back Russia in terms of their big geopolitical game. It's a lot like what they were trying to do and partially succeeded in doing in Afghanistan. You probably heard about Pipelanistan. It's not really just the fight against Al-Qaeda, the shadowy enemy we put into power and funded several decades back under Zbigniew Brzezinski and President Carter. It was a deal worked out with Al-Qaeda, the tribal leaders, and the mountains to carry oil from the Caspian Sea through Turkmenistan, through Afghanistan, through Pakistan, and through India, the TAPI, T-A-P-I, Pipelanistan plan, to get it into U.S. vessels to carry it to Western countries and further block both Russia and Iran now on either side of Iran. It's a super geopolitical chessboard move to come on the east side and now through Ukraine, the west side, with major oil energy transports.
Joe Biden's son and John Kerry's stepson, really?
I know, it's like the revelation at the end of a movie where you find out who's the real
Oh,
evil
that's
person.
who the bad guy was the whole time.
It's just not funny, though. It's not even suspenseful because the wars just predictably drag on and keep dragging Americans into it. And we know what it's all about. It's about world order. It's this fight for world order to restructure it so it's useful for the bankers.
That reminds me, I know I keep showing Time magazine covers, but it's such a target-rich environment for establishment propaganda. This one is actually from March of this year. And look, this land is my land, Russia, Crimea, and a return to the old world order. The old world order, something they obviously don't want.
Gotta have a new world order.
Gotta have the new world order.
And that's what it has been about. It's a clash of empires. It's this grand chessboard game. That was the term used by Zbigniew Brzezinski, the former National Security Director. And that's very much what's going on. Let's look at a little bit more of the history in a special report I did. News are actually olds because they correspond to what we expect to happen.
These are the men who unleashed the dogs of war today.
Therefore, a study of the olds is very interesting indeed.
Victory is near, comrades.
Why so many endless wars and conflicts? To understand that, we have to understand what predicates geopolitical strategy. In short, a history to control, dominate, encircle, subterfuge, order out of chaos. It's what the Russians and British have called for centuries the Great Game. It was circa 1904 that Halford Mackinder, the British founder of geostrategy and geopolitics and a member of the notorious London School of Economics, came up with the Heartland theory, which concerns the Russian mainland. He theorized that he who controls the heartland is in the pivot position to control the entire world. The surrounding Rimland was essentially putty to that end. But it was the Dutch-American geostrategist and professor at Yale, Nicholas Spykman, who leading up to World War II theorized the exact inverse, that the control of the Rimland led to control of the heartland and thus the larger world island. It's these Rimland countries encircling Russia in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and the Orient that were key to Spykman's theory of containment that proved so influential in the Cold War.
From the Bamboo Curtain to the Berlin Wall, we are maintaining our commitments. Standing firmly with our allies against communist designs for world conquest.
But chaos, not order, has been the result. Why? A closer look at Spykman's Rimland reveals the work of opposites at play, pushing against each other in tension and crisis, much like tectonic plates under the Earth's crust. The Rimland is more appropriately known as the arc of instability, a formula of the Hegelian Dialectic. Madness and turmoil that has justified the presence of U.S. armed forces and its allies in countless conflicts in countries all around the arc of tension. The Korean Wars, which split North and South over communism.
Operation Killer in Korea grinds steadily forward and northward, where United Nations forces face a new adversary.
Maoist China, where communism conflicted with Chiang Kai-shek's nationals.
The communists have been able to propel Red China to a position of major influence.
The Taiwan issue, the Tibet issue, Vietnam.
I don't understand. Why? Why
Vietnam, where French Indochina became another communist split between North and South.
French troops are fighting the last battle of a long war over what had been called French Indochina. It's a strange, three-cornered struggle. Non-communist Vietnamese fighting communist Vietnamese, and some of both fighting the French.
India and what was once Baluchistan, today Pakistan.
Again in India.
United under Gandhi's vision as a tolerant, secular, multiculturalist state, instead torn into rival states armed with nukes.
The Air Force flew in urgently needed arms at the request of India's government.
Afghanistan, at war with the Russians in the 80s.
We are fighting the same enemy. All the Muslims are fighting the Russians.
Before the war on terror with the U.S.
The most important resource is oil.
Iran, which suffered a coup to oust Mohammad Mossadegh in the 50s.
Developed by British interests, Iranian oil has been the subject of bitter dispute.
Which installed the Shah and saw the rise of radical Islam, the rule of the mullahs, a decade-long war with Iraq, and ongoing tensions with the U.S. Iraq, once a British colony, today a neo-colonial holding, saw the rise of Saddam Hussein, the Gulf War of the 90s.
Our goal was to put them into shock and destroy their ability to defend their homeland.
Attacked all of the strategic targets that I've spoken of, electrical power, communications, air defenses, and so forth.
And the Iraq War of 2003.
Quote, shock and awe.
Shots being fired now in Baghdad. I want our viewers to listen in.
Today it's seen the rise of ISIS and other forms of radical Islam, and there's talk of splitting it into 3 states between the Kurds and Shia and Sunni factions, now that the Ba'athist Party has been toppled. There's also the various Arab states created out of Arab tribes, mostly by the British and the French. Of course, today we're familiar with the various conflicts, civil wars, uprisings, and revolutions in places like Libya, Egypt, Syria, and of course Palestine and Israel, with Turkey here as a key pivot between East and West.
Our forces hold constant alerts to maintain this frontier of freedom.
In Eastern Europe, the Ukraine has seen conflict both now and then.
1932. Stalin wrote, "The situation in Ukraine is very bad. If we don't take steps now, we may lose Ukraine." The hunger began. Ukrainians were dying torturously slowly.
As has Poland.
The Poles, like the Hungarians, were breaking with the communist system. Political strikes led by the opposition movement Solidarity.
In their drive for world domination, the communists have identified different levels of possible conflict to exploit.
Communist coup in Czechoslovakia in 1948.
And standoffs in Czechoslovakia, which was at the time Soviet held.
Czechoslovakia today became the latest of the countries of Eastern Europe.
It was true people power that toppled the hardline communist leaders here.
And the former Yugoslavia.
Prior to 1914, Serbia and Montenegro formed a single kingdom that was allied to Tsarist Russia. Slovenia and Croatia were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, whose annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina led to the assassination at Sarajevo of the Austrian Archduke by a Serb, and hence to the First World War.
Today broken up into several states, giving rise to the name Balkanization.
It's demanded Serbian control over the Albanians.
The modern resurgence of the Cold War with Russia has seen tense standoffs with Poland, Ukraine, and Georgia.
The fighting followed months of escalating tension between Russia and Georgia. War erupted on August the 7th, when Georgia began this ferocious bombardment of one of its own regions, called South Ossetia.
Located here at a pivotal point between Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Russia.
Which he calls wars of liberation and popular revolt, but which we prefer to call subversion and covert aggression. It is these wars which Khrushchev says are not only admissible, but inevitable.
Not only are these constant and evolving tensions an ongoing recipe justifying intervention in the region throughout the Rimland, in some ways these conflicts are made inevitable through the relative artificial mapping of states against the ethnicities scattered throughout the region. As was done after both world wars. After World War I, Mackinder introduced geostrategy in helping to draw the new lines of the countries. Leading up to World War II, Spykman, though he died before the end of the war, influenced the carving up of the world through the eyes of the containment plan. Is the end game near on this larger grand chessboard? The great game goes on between Russia and the Anglo-American Empire. For our sake, let's hope it doesn't end in a World War III type scenario. So there you have it, a better understanding of why these conflicts are so perpetual, why these wars keep dragging on and on and on. Anyway, we'll be back after this break.
Well, I'm a 21st century mom, and I want to make sure that my children are prepared for the Agenda 21 future that's unfolding all around us right now. That's why I've converted a room in our house to my daughter's new bedroom. Because Al Gore says we have too much space. It's actually just a closet. We've got to protect the Earth because humans are using up all of the Earth's resources. And even though there are mega corporations that are spewing bioavailable heavy metals and poisonous chemicals into the environment at a rate that we could never as individuals match in our lifetimes, it's been shown that single-family homes really are the problem here. If you really love the planet, you should be willing to live in as small of a space as physically possible. The social engineers plan to double all the mega regions across the country by 2050. People are going to need to learn how to live with a lot less. I mean, look how cool this is. This is awesome. What kid wouldn't want to live in such an awesome, cool, trendy, hip room? We're going to turn her old room into a tree nursery so we can plant trees for the Earth. Humans have too much space anyway, and nobody wants to feel all that yucky green guilt. And what people think of as cramped is actually really good for the environment and sustainable and stuff like that. Among other things we've been doing as a family, we've been practicing breathing less so we don't use as much oxygen. I try to breathe mostly through my nose. Besides, she's gonna need to make sure she's paying all her carbon taxes. It's because we exist. That's what's destroying the planet, okay? I've read this. I saw it in Mother Jones. Actually, we have to take bicycles a lot, which for a family of 4 is kind of tough on the highway, but I figure if I accidentally get killed, that'll just be one less human hurting the planet. You should really try it yourself with some of the closets in your house. Well, it's still your choice. Brought to you by the Al Gore worshipping yuppies who think humans reproducing is socially irresponsible because there's just too many of us and we're all like psychopathic earth murderers club.
Seriously?
We're back, and this week we both had brushes with politicians, actually.
Who did you meet, Melissa?
I talked to LBJ on the phone.
Wow, LBJ?
Yeah.
Let's take a look.
Hello.
Hey, President Johnson, it's Melissa Melton from Truthstream News. I was wondering if I could borrow a few minutes of your time. I'd like to start with kind of an icebreaker question. What's your favorite kind of baby?
The light brown, kind of a almost powder color, like powder on a lady's face.
Who's on the phone?
Oh, hold on a second. It's LBJ.
LBJ? Ask that son of a bitch about Kennedy.
Oh, yeah. how are you dealing with the guilt over JFK's murder?
The crotch down where your nuts hang is always a little too tight.
Wow, that is very specific. You don't want to know. So it really sucks the way that whole Gulf of Tonkin false flag went down.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, the fact that our ships were never actually attacked and it was all just a pretext to go to the Vietnam War.
That's about it.
Sir, how did it feel to learn that your Council on Foreign Relations pals essentially threw you under the bus on a war they never intended to let America win?
They cut me. It's just like riding a wire fence. An inch from where the zipper ends round under my back to my bunghole. Yeah, that's right, my bunghole.
Wow, that sounds very personally scarring. Yeah. Okay, well, I know you're busy. You got a pool game to play with Hitler there in hell, and I got things to do too, so I'll talk to you later, okay?
Bye.
Wow, that was really something.
Those phone calls really exist, by the way. The ones that they have from the...
Fun with real audio?
They actually release those phone calls. There's some good Nixon ones, too.
Well, I actually really met a real politician, but I just saw him while I was driving and stuck in traffic. The congressman from my district, Lloyd Doggett. Let's take a look.
All right, Lloyd Doggett's in this car coming up. We just saw him. U.S. Congressional District 35. Real douchebag, but he's actually in traffic. You can see his car. Not that one. You can see it a little bit in the reflection. But this is the actual representative. At least he drives himself. I think he's trying to not be filmed.
Hey, let's take another break. Isn't that what they do on the mainstream media? Let's take another break.
And now, a letter to the New World Order.
Dear greedy, pig-faced, world-raping, globalist monsters of the New World Order, how are you? As tensions rising in the Middle East with Israel invading Gaza, Pakistani Al-Qaeda attempting to overthrow Kabul, ISIS attempting a caliphate, the Ukraine pointing fingers at Russia, and China sending surveillance ships to Hawaii, you must be rolling in it. The massive arms sales to the secular terrorists, Syrian rebels the West has been training in an attempt to overthrow the Syrian government in a bid to position the grand chess pieces that much closer to Iran, while also encircling Russia to bring the planet that much closer to World War III, must have helped. Of course, your private central banks print the stuff and use it to enslave the world with usury, so I guess you do that anyway. Gee, it sure seems like you've really put a lot of time and effort into your self-serving plan for global domination. Geopolitics is a hobby of mine too. And one time I had a dream that the rest of us suffering under your thumb around the world opened all of our eyes at once and recognized the lie after lie after lie. Your controlled media uses to brainwash them so they could see the truth, band together, and decentralize your control grid. Before you cull the population to 500 million like it says on the Georgia Guidestones. I know it was just a dream, but you still really creep me out. Sincerely, me. And that was a letter to the New World Order.
Did you know the 85 richest people in the world now have as much wealth as the 3.5 billion poorest?
Is this global governance at last? Is it one world, the central bankers in charge?
We are absolutely slaves to central banks.
Brought to you by the American Dream. It's a dream because you have to be asleep to believe it.
On a more serious note, you know that Melissa and I have been looking into where our food comes from and thinking very seriously about nutrition, health, and what kind of ingredients we want to personally eat for the children and people in our family. And for all the viewers out there, we want you to at least know what you're eating, and so you can make a decision on your own as to what's appropriate. So we took a trip. Well, do you want to tell them?
Yeah, we decided to go see what a CAFO lot actually looks like, because I think that the issue here is that when you go to the grocery store, there's a veil between you and where your food actually comes from. So we wanted to go and see where that actually is. And this is what happened. We're just outside a town that has 3 gigantic CAFO feedlots. And they're just dead cows just on the side of the road. And this one's obviously been there long enough for dust to blow up all around it. No one's coming out here and moving this cow. No one's getting it. I think if America knew where its food really came from and how its food was treated, it might think a little differently about what it was eating. Giant pile of cow dung covered in tires. Oh yeah, we can smell it too. Road right here.
It's like England, money is measured in pounds.
That's the Cargill plant. And right there, underneath those tires, are literal mountains of cow dung. Mountains of them. Wow. That is insane. Sorry, guys. Sorry, cows. God, that smell is horrible. Look at how many. It just goes on and on. There's no visibility.
Wow, there's zero. Shit, we're driving into a windstorm.
miles and miles of cows. Have you ever seen this many cows in one place before? Anyone? This just goes on and on and on and on. Just all cows. This is where everybody's food comes from in America, right here. Miles and miles of cows. Some of these cows are standing on giant piles of dung. Because that's how much there is. This is just mile upon mile upon mile. And it just goes back as far as we can see. So horrible out here. I can't even describe how much it smells, and it's not even warm. Can you imagine what it's like in the summertime out here? God, as far as the eye can see, it's just cows. Just cows for as far as the eye can see.
There's a cow piled on top of other cows. It's just...
So many cows. God, it makes me so mad. It's just so disgusting. Do you want me to go back down that road? Think we can drive? Can we drive down here?
Yeah, it's a road.
This is where the food comes from. Hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of cows shoved into little tiny pens, like freaking worse than like cattle actually. And look, they're saying this is a biosecure facility and we're not allowed to film it. You know why? Because they don't want people to see. They don't want people to see how disgusting and horrible the food is treated. Look at this. Hundreds of cows shoved into a little box. It's like concentration camps for people's food. It smells disgusting out here. This is gross. Oh, freaking biosecure facility. No pictures may be taken. Well, I'm on a public road, and I'm taking pictures. You know why? They don't want you to see how disgusting this is. This is disgusting. I'm outraged.
Turn around and get the hell out of here.
I don't think people have any idea where their food comes from in this country. I don't think they have the slightest clue. Your food comes from concentration camps. Alright? It's drugged up with antibiotics and all kinds of chemicals and then shoved into little metal pins. And then you eat it.
I don't know, you want to do sticks?
The issue here isn't about us trying to tell people to be vegetarians. We're not entirely full of vegetarians. I mean, we mostly don't eat meat, but the issue here is about telling people to at least look into how their food is being raised. What it is that you're purchasing when you put your money on the counter. Are you supporting what is essentially an ethical and environmental nightmare every time you buy food?
Well, some people aren't concerned about the ethics of it, but there's also the issue of transparency. We know we don't have GMO labeling, so it's very difficult without a lot of research to know if you're eating genetically modified corn or soy or what's in your box foods or where your vegetables come from. But it's also true of meat because, as you can see, they don't want you to see how your food is raised. Forget whether or not you personally choose to have a hamburger or eat a chicken or whatever. Why is it not okay to go look and see where that comes from? In many states in this country, the lobbyists for the food industries and the mega corn producers and the mega livestock producers, they have implemented ag-gag laws, a term that is supposed to restrict your right to film any kind of agricultural institution, acting as though filming it is some kind of act of terrorism, when it should be everyone's right to know what kind of conditions the food's raised.
I mean, what you're eating, that's a very basic component of your daily life. That nutrition, what you put inside your body, determines all kinds of things about your health and quality of life. So knowing where that food comes from, that should be basic. That should be a basic fundamental right. And we have laws now in states they're passing to try and get people to not be able to film undercover. Why would they even have to film undercover to begin with? Well, because they don't want you to know how your food is being produced. We were on a public road, and we live in Texas, and there are no ag-gag laws here, surprisingly. So we filmed because that's our right. That's our First Amendment right.
But at the same time, you see on the sign how they're trying to intimidate people out of filming and give the appearance that it's not okay to film, using that term, this is a biosecure facility. It's a place where people's food is raised. Everyone has a stake in that, no pun intended. Whether or not you choose to eat meat, we need to know what's going on. And furthermore, these CAFOs have major environmental pollution and runoff. They affect surrounding areas. We discussed some of those issues. It's such a big topic that we'll probably have to do other reports.
They've done whole documentaries on it for sure, but this is something that affects every single person who's eating these foods. And there's something that doesn't translate in that report that we just you can't get it across unless you see it for yourself. But that was horrifying. And the longer we filmed it, and I don't know if it came across, but I hope that it did, the more upset we got just being there and seeing it. It was horrible. Those cows were they were packed in there. They were just stuffed in there, and they were making horrible noises. There was one area where a cow was just piled on top of another cow, not because they were doing anything, but because there was nowhere for that cow to go. That's how many were shoved in such a small space. These animals are suffering. That is not an enjoyable experience for them. And then you eat the suffering that is produced by this. This is not natural. There's nothing normal about this industrial farming that they're doing.
Well, and like other issues, not just food related, but just in general with society, the market has been so consolidated and condensed and is tied to the abuse of power in Washington, the related lobbyists, that all the ranchers and farmers who own these cows, there's hundreds of thousands of them in the country, are pressured to use antibiotics, to send their cows to a CAFO to live in these conditions because it's so expensive to raise them pasture raised where they eat grass. And there's so much pressure for them to be overweight. But partially because of drought conditions and also feed conditions, they've actually shrunken the herd size since the 70s and 80s. There's less cows than there used to be, but they're drastically bigger. They're pumped up and they're big and they're mean, and it's a big cut of meat that they produce there. But they do it by taking shortcuts with GMO corn and other feed additives, and through the use of antibiotics that help them with weight gain and other things that promote weight gain. Is that the kind of food you want to eat? Are you okay with those ethical issues? Well, that's a large conversation. We're not here to tell you how to think, but we better damn sure at least know where our food comes from and be able to transparently look behind the veil of how it's produced and what those conditions are. The fact they intimidate people out of reporting on that should speak volumes alone for itself.
Agreed. I just think people need to at least know what we're talking about here. Because people talk about CAFOs, but until you've seen this for yourself and seen where your food comes from, and I can't imagine it. I just can't imagine it if you were a cow, how that would be. I mean, we have to start getting more connected to ourselves and connected to reality. We're in this matrix where they've got TV in front of your face all the time. They've hidden your food behind these little idyllic pictures of barns on the package and words like all natural. But where's your food actually come from? How is your food treated? What's done to it before it gets to your table? These are important questions, and we should be allowed to ask them.
Yeah. And more broadly, this is the first episode of Truthstream News as a formatted, packaged news show, and we're trying to cover a variety of topics, give you in-depth coverage with historical context, something the mainstream media never does. Because as we've seen, they have wars in multiple theaters across the map, but there's another theater, the theater of the mind, and that's where they use a term that was coined by someone else, at least back in the Bush administration years, and that is weapons of mass distraction. You've seen how they jump from one crisis to the other. Ebola back to the Cold War, back to Gaza, back to the Ukraine crisis, back to Iraq, back to some other major issue. They're all important, and they're all so full of lies and deceptions and distortions. We're doing what we can to break through it. We don't know everything, but we're going to tell you what we do know, and we appreciate your support out there. We've had a lot of love and encouragement from our viewers to help us keep going, and we could also use your donations as well for those who want to give. And
we're not state funded by any means, quite obviously, but we're going to go ahead and get this a try, and thanks everyone for all the support.
We want to bring you more coverage and do other special projects and reports, so help us to make a difference, and we'll do everything that we can. We humbly appreciate your support. We're trying to continue and expand our coverage, give you special reports, and we need your help in watching this, sharing it with others, getting the word out about it, and we'll try to increase the quality of the coverage and keep this show going.
Wow, first show. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks for watching Truthstream News. You can find us at truthstreammedia.com.
Bye, guys.